Here are the most disturbing real-life villains you've never heard of. Let's start with a countess from Hungary who lived in the late 1500s and early 1600s. Elizabeth Báthory was born into one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in Hungary. She was intelligent, educated in multiple languages, and by all accounts, exceptionally beautiful. She married Count Ferenc Nardasti when she was just 15, and they lived in Choctitz Castle. From the outside, she had everything: wealth, status, beauty, power. But behind the walls of her castle, something absolutely horrifying was happening. She's accused of torturing and killing anywhere from 80 to 650 young women, though the exact number will never be known. She would lure young peasant girls to her castle with promises of work as servants, and then the nightmare would begin. Her methods of torture were absolutely brutal. She would beat girls with clubs, burn them with hot irons, stick pins and needles under their fingernails, and force them to stand naked in the freezing cold until they died of hypothermia. Some accounts say she would bite chunks of flesh from their faces and bodies. She'd cover girls in honey and leave them outside to be attacked by insects. She used red-hot pokers and branding irons. The list goes on and on. But here's what she's most infamous for: bathing in the blood of virgins. According to legend, Báthory believed that bathing in young women's blood would preserve her youth and beauty. Whether this part is true or exaggerated by later writers is heavily debated by historians. But what's absolutely certain is that she tortured and murdered numerous young women just for fun. She was simply a serial killer who used her noble status as a shield for over 25 years. She was eventually arrested in 1610 when authorities raided her castle and found dead and dying girls everywhere. Bodies were discovered under beds in the courtyard and buried in various locations around the castle. Her accomplices were brutally executed, but because of her noble status, Báthory was simply walled up in her own castle, locked in a set of rooms with only small slits for food and air. She died there 4 years later, never showing any remorse. But if you think that's bad, you are not ready for the next villain. Now let's travel to 15th century Romania and talk about a prince named Vlad III, also known as Vlad Dracula or Vlad Tepes. You might know him better as Vlad the Impaler, and yes, he's the guy who inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula. But trust me, the real Vlad was way more terrifying than any fictional vampire could ever be. Vlad had what you might call a difficult childhood. His father, Vlad II, was betrayed by his own nobles and buried alive. His older brother Misa was blinded with hot stakes and then buried alive as well. Vlad himself was held hostage by the Ottoman Empire from the age of 13, where he was allegedly tortured and abused. So yeah, these experiences did not make him a well-adjusted adult. When he finally took the throne of Wallachia in 1456, he decided that extreme brutality was the answer to everything. Vlad's favorite method of execution was obviously impalement, and he elevated it to an art form. But he didn't just kill people quickly. The stakes were carefully designed to be blunt and oiled so they would slide into the body slowly without hitting vital organs immediately. This meant victims could survive for days in absolute agony. He impaled thousands of people: men, women, children, nobles, peasants, criminals, foreign ambassadors, it didn't matter. He once invited the sick and poor to a feast and then burned the building down with everyone inside, claiming he was freeing them from their misery. Another time, he nailed the turbans to the heads of Ottoman diplomats who refused to remove them in his presence. His most infamous act was in 1462 when he impaled an entire Ottoman army of around 20,000 soldiers and arranged them in a forest of corpses outside the city of Târgoviște. When Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, a man who had conquered Constantinople and seen plenty of brutality himself, arrived and saw this nightmarish display stretching for miles, he reportedly turned his entire army around and went home. Even the most hardened warriors of the era were terrified of Vlad. He died in battle in 1476, and according to legend, his enemies cut off his head and displayed it on a stake in Constantinople. Poetic justice, I suppose. Next up, we have a French nobleman named Gilles de Rais. Born in 1405, Gilles inherited massive wealth and became one of the richest men in France. He was a knight, a baron, and most notably, he fought alongside Joan of Arc during the 100 Years' War, becoming a national hero. After Joan's execution, Gilles retired to his castles and estates. He had everything: wealth beyond measure, multiple castles, fame, respect, but he threw it all away for something unspeakably evil. Gilles de Rais is believed to have tortured and murdered between 1,400 children, mostly young boys between the ages of 6 and 16. He would lure them to his castles with promises of food, money, or work as pages. Once inside, he would subject them to torture that I genuinely can't describe here because it's too horrific even for this video. His own servants later testified that there were rooms in his castles with blood-stained walls and floors, and the bodies of children were regularly burned in the fireplace or buried on the grounds. For years, he got away with it because of his wealth and status. Peasant families would report their missing children, but nobody dared accuse a war hero and baron. Finally, in 1440, after Gilles made the mistake of kidnapping a clergyman during a property dispute, the church had enough reason to investigate. When authorities raided his castles, they found the evidence. The trial was sensational. Gilles initially refused to confess, but eventually broke down and admitted to everything in graphic detail, showing no real remorse. He was hanged and then burned on October 26, 1440. Some historians believe he was the inspiration for the fairy tale of Bluebeard. The reality was infinitely worse than any fairy tale. Now let's jump forward to 19th century America and talk about H. Holmes, often called America's first serial killer. Born Herman Webster Mudgett in 1861, he was intelligent, charming, and by all accounts quite handsome. He became a con artist and bigamist, but his crimes went far beyond fraud. During the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, Holmes committed what may be one of the most elaborate series of murders in history. Holmes purchased a lot in Chicago and built a three-story building that he claimed would be a hotel for World's Fair visitors. But Holmes designed the building himself, and it was actually an elaborate death trap that later became known as the Murder Castle. The building had over 60 rooms with doorways that opened to brick walls, staircases that led to nowhere, doors that could only be locked from the outside, soundproof rooms lined with asbestos, secret passages, trapdoors, chutes leading to the basement, and a room that could be filled with gas. The basement contained a crematorium, acid vats, and a dissection table. Holmes would rent rooms to visitors, especially single women traveling alone, and then murder them. He'd steal their belongings, dispose of their bodies by burning them or dissolving them in acid, and sometimes sell their skeletons to medical schools for profit. He confessed to 27 murders, but investigators believe the actual number could be over 200. He was finally caught in 1894 for insurance fraud. The investigation led to his murder castle, and when police searched it, they found the charred remains of victims and bones scattered throughout. Holmes was hanged in 1896, and reportedly the hanging was botched, so his neck didn't break immediately and he slowly strangled to death for about 15 minutes. Even then, he remained eerily calm. Finally, let's talk about Tomás de Torquemada, the name that became synonymous with the Spanish Inquisition. Born in 1420 in Valladolid, Spain, Torquemada was a Dominican friar who caught the attention of Queen Isabella of Castile, becoming her confessor. In 1483, he was appointed Grand Inquisitor of Spain, and he took his job with terrifying enthusiasm. Torquemada was obsessed with rooting out heresy, particularly among Jewish and Muslim converts to Christianity. Under his authority, the Spanish Inquisition became one of the most brutal organizations in history. Torquemada personally oversaw the torture and execution of thousands of people. The methods were horrific. The rack, where victims' bodies were stretched until their joints dislocated and limbs tore off. The strappado, where victims were hung by their wrists tied behind their backs and then dropped, dislocating their shoulders. Water torture, where victims were forced to drink water until their stomachs distended, and burning alive at the stake, often done slowly with green wood that didn't burn hot enough to kill quickly. Conservative estimates put the number of people executed under Torquemada at over 2,000, with another 32,000 tortured and punished. But his influence went beyond individual executions. In 1492, Torquemada convinced King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel to issue the Alhambra decree expelling all Jews from Spain who refused to convert to Christianity. This forced hundreds of thousands of people to flee, abandoning their homes, businesses, and possessions. Torquemada died in 1498, supposedly of natural causes, though some accounts say he lived his final years in constant paranoia, changing bedrooms every night and never eating food prepared by the same cook twice, terrified of revenge. So there you have it, 5 real-life villains who proved that the most terrifying monsters in history were human beings. These people actually existed. These things actually happened. Drop a comment below and let me know which one disturbed you the most. And honestly, if you need something wholesome after this, I don't blame you. As always, thank you for watching. I'm Fake Professor, and I seriously need therapy after all this research. Until next time, remember that monsters are real. They just don't always look like we expect them to.